The streets of Los Angeles were alive with the hum of traffic, neon lights casting a glow on the bustling city. A yellow cab pulled up to the curb, its driver adjusting his cap and glancing at the rearview mirror. Beneath the simple disguise, worn-out jacket, fake beard, and a pair of dark sunglasses was none other than Elon Musk. The world's richest man and the face of innovation had traded his high-tech lifestyle for the chaotic life of a cabbie, at least for the night. But why? Elon wasn't here for thrills or a publicity stunt. This was a calculated move, a covert experiment he had orchestrated. The goal? To experience life through the eyes of the average person and uncover stories that could reshape his perspective on humanity. A small hidden camera was discreetly installed on the dashboard, capturing every moment, not for a documentary, but for Elon's personal reflection. He had a hunch that tonight, something extraordinary was going to happen. As he waited for his first passenger, a notification pinged on the cab's tablet. Pickup, 5th and Main. Elon's hands tightened on the wheel. His first ride of the night was about to begin. Little did he know it would set off a chain of events that neither he nor his passengers would ever forget. Elon pulled up to the corner of 5th and Main where a young woman stood, nervously glancing at her phone. Her clothes were simple but neat, and she carried a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. As she climbed into the back seat, she let out a small sigh of relief as if the weight of her day had been momentarily lifted. "Downtown, please," she said, her voice soft but tinged with exhaustion. Elon nodded, his voice steady. "Long day?" She hesitated, then let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that. I've been job hunting all day. No luck. And now I'm late to pick up my daughter." The word daughter caught Elon's attention. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, noticing the faint lines of worry etched on her face. "What kind of work are you looking for?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "Anything, really," she replied, shrugging. "I was a teacher before everything fell apart." Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Now I just need something to keep the lights on." Elon felt a pang of empathy. Here was someone who had clearly given her all to a noble profession, only to be left scrambling for survival. His mind raced with ideas, but he knew better than to jump in with solutions right away. People didn't need a hero. They needed someone who understood. As they drove, the woman's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face falling as she read the message. "Missed another one," she muttered under her breath. "Another what?" Elon asked, genuinely curious. "Interview," she replied, her voice tight. "They said I'm overqualified. Like that's supposed to make me feel better." Elon tightened his grip on the wheel. This wasn't just a story about one woman. It was a reflection of a broken system, one he had the power to influence. But before he could say anything, a voice crackled through the cab's radio. "Pick up at Westside Diner." "Mind if I take another fare on the way?" Elon asked. She waved a hand dismissively. "Go ahead. I'm in no rush anymore." As they pulled up to the diner, a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit climbed in. His tie was loosened, and he carried a briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. He barely acknowledged the young woman as he sat down, muttering his destination. "Airport, Terminal B." Elon glanced at the woman in the mirror. She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the new passenger. The man leaned back in his seat, oblivious to the silent exchange. He was staring out the window, his expression a mix of frustration and defeat. "So what's got you headed to the airport?" Elon asked, trying to lighten the mood. The man let out a dry laugh. "A one-way ticket out of this mess. Lost my job today. 30 years in finance, and they tell me I'm no longer a good fit." The young woman looked up, her curiosity piqued. "Finance? That sounds impressive." The man snorted. "Not impressive enough, apparently. And you? What's your story?" She hesitated, then said, "Former teacher. Now just trying to keep my head above water." For the first time, the man turned to look at her. "A teacher, huh? Maybe you're the one who can teach me how to start over." Elon's eyes flicked between the two in the mirror. There was a strange connection forming, an unspoken bond between two strangers who were both grappling with their own versions of failure. He said nothing, letting the silence settle as they drove. But as they neared the airport, Elon noticed something unusual, a black SUV parked near the terminal entrance, its occupants watching the cab intently. His instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. He dropped his voice to a near whisper. "Stay calm, both of you. I think we're being followed." The atmosphere in the cab shifted instantly. The young woman clutched her bag tightly, her eyes darting nervously toward the rearview mirror. The man in the suit straightened, his tired expression replaced by a mix of confusion and alarm. Followed? By who? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Elon replied, his eyes fixed on the SUV parked near the terminal. The men inside weren't hiding their interest in the cab. One of them, wearing a sharp suit and an earpiece, seemed to be speaking into a radio. Elon's mind raced. This wasn't random. They were looking for something, or someone. He quickly pulled into a nearby parking lot, turning off the engine and motioning for his passengers to stay quiet. We're going to sit here for a moment, he said calmly. If they move, I'll know for sure. The seconds felt like hours as they all watched the SUV. Sure enough, after a moment it rolled out of its spot, slowly cruising past the cab. The driver seemed to be scanning the area, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Elon's taxi. The SUV came to a stop a few spaces away, its engine idling ominously. What do they want? The young woman asked, her voice trembling. Elon glanced at her, then at the man. I was about to ask you two the same thing. Either of you have something someone might be willing to chase down? The man shook his head vigorously. I'm just a washed-up finance guy. I don't even have money left to steal. The woman hesitated, her face pale. No, I can't think of anything. Elon studied her for a moment, then looked back at the SUV. His instincts told him otherwise, but now wasn't the time to push. All right, he said, starting the engine again. We're going to play this smart. Instead of heading directly to the terminal, Elon took a sharp turn, steering them onto a service road that wound through the airport's backlots. The SUV followed immediately, its headlights glaring like a predator locking onto prey. Great. They're definitely after us, the man muttered, gripping the seat. Elon smirked faintly. They're after me now. You're just along for the ride. What's the plan? The woman asked, panic creeping into her voice. Elon's tone was calm, almost casual. We lose them. He floored the gas pedal, the cab lurching forward as the engine roared to life. The SUV followed, its tires screeching on the asphalt. Elon took sharp turns and narrow paths that only someone familiar with the city's layout could navigate. The cab weaved through tight alleys and abandoned service roads, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. The passengers clung to their seats, a mix of fear and awe plastered on their faces. You're a cab driver? The man asked incredulously, his voice shaking. Not exactly, Elon said with a grin, his calm demeanor belying the chaos around them. The chase grew more intense as the SUV inched closer. Elon spotted a fork in the road ahead and made a split-second decision. Hold on, he shouted, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The cab skidded down a narrow alley, its side mirrors barely clearing the walls. The SUV hesitated for a moment, then followed, but the hesitation was all Elon needed. Up ahead, he spotted a ramp leading to a parking garage. He steered the cab up the incline, weaving through the tight spirals until they reached the top floor. The SUV burst into the garage moments later, but as it climbed the ramps, Elon pulled a bold move. He turned sharply into an empty corner and killed the engine, plunging them into silence. The cab was hidden in the shadows, and Elon motioned for his passengers to stay quiet. The SUV sped past, its engine echoing through the structure. They all held their breath as the sound faded, the vehicle moving farther away. After a tense few moments, the woman whispered, "Did we lose them?" Elon nodded but didn't let his guard down. "For now. But whoever they are, they're not giving up easily." The man exhaled shakily. "What now? We can't just sit here." Elon leaned back in his seat, his mind working at lightning speed. "We don't sit. We figure out why they're after us and what they're willing to risk for it." He turned to the woman, his gaze sharp. "You're sure you're not carrying anything unusual?" Her hands tightened on her bag, her face conflicted. It's nothing." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Define nothing." She hesitated, then slowly unzipped the bag. Inside was a small, nondescript envelope. She pulled it out, her hands trembling. "It's a file. A friend gave it to me. She said it was important. Said it could expose something big." Elon's eyes narrowed. "Expose what?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "Atlas Industries. She said it's proof they've been funding illegal experiments." The man in the suit let out a low whistle. "That'll do it." Elon leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Well, now we know why they're chasing us. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Elon stared at the envelope, his mind racing. The weight of the situation had just multiplied. Atlas Industries wasn't just a shady corporation. They were notorious for silencing anyone who posed a threat to their bottom line. And now, their attention was squarely on this cab and its unlikely trio. "Let me see that," Elon said, extending his hand. The woman hesitated, her grip on the envelope tightening. "If they find out we've seen this, it'll only make things worse." "They already know we have it," Elon said calmly. "At this point, the only way out is forward." Reluctantly, she handed it over. Elon opened the envelope, revealing a stack of documents and a USB drive. The papers were dense with technical jargon, charts, and signatures. But one thing stood out: a series of memos detailing human trials for a new energy weapon disguised as a renewable energy project. The young woman pointed to one of the memos. "This is what my friend was investigating. She said Atlas was testing this tech on small communities, cutting off their power and using them as guinea pigs for their experiments." The man in the suit leaned over, his expression darkening as he scanned the papers. "They're targeting underdeveloped areas where nobody will notice if this gets out." He trailed off, shaking his head. Elon's mind clicked into overdrive. The stakes were higher than he'd imagined, but this was more than just a fight for survival now. It was a chance to expose the truth. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "We have two priorities: staying alive and getting this information to the right people." "And who are the right people?" the man asked skeptically. "Atlas probably has half the government in their pocket." Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. "I know a few people who aren't afraid to go up against giants," he said, "but we'll need to keep moving. They'll figure out where we are soon enough." As if on cue, the sound of tires screeching echoed through the parking garage. The woman's eyes widened. "They're here." Elon stuffed the documents back into the envelope and handed it to her. "Hold on to this. No matter what happens, don't let them get it." "What about you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'll buy us some time," Elon said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Now both of you get ready to run." The man looked at him incredulously. "You're not seriously planning to take them on alone?" Elon's grin widened. "You'd be surprised what a cab driver can do." Before either of them could argue, Elon stepped out of the vehicle, leaving the engine running. He walked into the open, hands in his pockets, as two black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of him. Several men in suits spilled out, their eyes narrowing as they spotted him. The man in the leather jacket from earlier stepped forward, his expression cold. "You've been a real pain, you know that?" Elon shrugged, his voice casual. "It's a gift." The man's lips curled into a sneer. "Hand over the files and maybe we'll let you walk out of here." Elon tilted his head, feigning thought. Tempting. But how about this? I give you nothing, and you leave with your egos bruised instead." The man's patience snapped. "Enough games." He motioned for his men to advance. Elon didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pressed a button on his phone. Instantly, the cab's headlights blazed to life, their intensity blinding in the dimly lit garage. At the same moment, the car's engine roared, and it began to roll forward, forcing the men to scatter. Using the chaos, Elon bolted toward the far side of the garage. The young woman and the man in the suit were already running, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Elon caught up with them as they reached a stairwell. "This way," he shouted, leading them down the stairs. Behind them, the men shouted orders, their footsteps pounding on the concrete. Elon's mind raced. He needed another distraction, something big enough to throw them off completely. As they reached the ground level, he spotted an exit leading to a service road. "Keep running," he said, his voice firm. "I'll catch up." "What are you going to do?" the woman asked, panic in her voice. "Trust me," Elon replied, already heading back toward the stairwell. Without another word, the two of them ran, disappearing into the night. Elon turned back to face their pursuers, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. He wasn't just a cab driver tonight. He was the one thing standing between Atlas and the truth. Elon ascended 2 flights of stairs back into the parking garage, moving swiftly but with purpose. The SUV headlights remained on, casting long, eerie shadows across the concrete. The men were still scrambling, trying to figure out where he and the others had gone. Elon crouched low behind a support pillar, pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered over another button on the screen. this one marked with a custom command tied to his personal network. In an instant, every car in the garage with autopilot capabilities roared to life. Headlights flashed, engines revved, and a symphony of honking erupted. The sound echoed chaotically, disorienting the men as vehicles began moving seemingly on their own. Elon had remotely activated a swarm mode he had been testing, a feature never intended for this kind of situation, but it worked. "Find him," barked the man in the leather jacket, his voice sharp and panicked. "He's controlling the cars." Elon smiled faintly from his hiding spot. They were wasting precious time chasing shadows while the real files were getting farther away. He spotted a narrow maintenance corridor on the far side of the garage and slipped into it, his movements silent and calculated. As he navigated the dimly lit passage, he activated the microphone on his phone. "GPS override engaged," he muttered, instructing the swarm of vehicles to form a blockade at the garage exits. The sound of screeching tires and slamming doors echoed behind him as the cars moved into position, trapping the SUVs and their occupants. Emerging onto the service road, Elon scanned the area. The woman and the man were nowhere in sight. Good. He had told them to keep running, and it seemed they had listened. But the sound of distant sirens in the background reminded him that time was running out. Atlas wouldn't stop, and soon their reach would extend beyond just a few hired thugs. Elon moved toward his backup plan. Down the road, he had stashed an electric motorcycle, a stripped-down prototype with no traceable tech. As he approached, he spotted a figure waiting beside it. His heart sank for a moment before he realized it was the young woman clutching the envelope tightly. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice a mix of frustration and concern. She shook her head, her expression defiant. "I couldn't just leave you." Elon sighed but didn't have time to argue. "Where's the guy?" "He kept going like you said," she replied. "He said he'd get to a safe house." Elon nodded, strapping the envelope to the back of the motorcycle. "All right, get on. We're not out of this yet." She hesitated for a moment but climbed on behind him, clutching his jacket tightly as he revved the engine. The motorcycle shot forward, its silent hum cutting through the night. Elon took the service road, weaving through alleys and industrial zones, avoiding main streets where Atlas's men would undoubtedly be searching. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rush of wind. "To someone who can help," Elon replied. "Someone who can make sure this gets out to the public." The city lights faded behind them as they headed toward the outskirts, where warehouses and abandoned buildings dotted the landscape. Elon pulled into an unmarked facility, its entrance hidden behind a chain-link fence. He tapped a code into a keypad, and the gates creaked open. Inside, a lone figure stood waiting, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She was dressed in casual clothes, but the air of authority around her was unmistakable. "Elon," she said, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "You've brought trouble, haven't you?" "Something like that," Elon replied, handing her the envelope. "This needs to go public. Atlas can't hide anymore." The woman flipped through the documents quickly, her eyes widening as she realized their significance. "This is explosive." "Exactly," Elon said, "and we're running out of time." Before she could respond, the sound of engines roared outside. Elon turned sharply. Atlas's men had found them. The roar of engines outside was deafening, accompanied by the faint sound of car doors slamming and boots hitting the pavement. Elon, the young woman, and the sharp-eyed contact exchanged a tense glance. The gravity of the situation was crystal clear. Atlas wouldn't let them walk out without a fight. Elon moved quickly, sealing the entrance to the facility with a heavy metal bar. "How long do you need to transmit the files?" he asked the contact. 10 minutes, maybe less," she replied, already moving toward a bank of computers at the back of the room. "But if they cut the power or intercept the signal, we're dead in the water." Elon's mind raced. He turned to the young woman. "Stay with her. Whatever happens, don't stop until the files are sent." "What about you?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. Elon gave her a faint smile. "I'll buy you those 10 minutes. Without waiting for a response, he grabbed a wrench from a nearby workbench and headed toward the back exit. As he stepped outside, he was greeted by the sight of multiple SUVs and armed men fanning out across the lot. The man in the leather jacket stood at the center, barking orders. "Elon Musk," the man called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You really thought you could outrun us? Hand over the files, and maybe we'll let you go." Elon took a step forward, holding the wrench loosely in one hand. "You guys really need to stop underestimating cab drivers," he said, his tone light but his gaze deadly serious. The man laughed, gesturing to his team. "Take him." The first two men advanced cautiously, their weapons drawn. Elon moved like a blur, ducking under one swing and using the wrench to knock the gun from the other man's hand. Before they could react, he delivered a swift kick to one and elbowed the other, sending them both to the ground. More men charged, but Elon used the tight spaces between the vehicles to his advantage, weaving in and out as he picked them off one by one. The sharp clang of metal against weapons and the grunts of fallen men filled the air, but Elon kept moving, his focus unwavering. Inside the facility, the young woman watched the battle unfold through a small window, her heart pounding. "He's outnumbered," she said, her voice trembling. The contact didn't look up from the computer. "He knows what he's doing, just keep an eye on that door." Outside, the leather-jacketed man grew impatient. "Enough of this," he snarled, pulling out his own weapon. He aimed at Elon, but before he could fire, Elon hurled the wrench with pinpoint accuracy, knocking the gun from his hand. "You're really bad at this," Elon said, his smirk infuriatingly calm. The man snarled, charging at Elon with nothing but brute force. They collided, grappling, as the remaining Atlas men hesitated, unsure of their next move. Elon managed to twist the man's arm and send him sprawling to the ground, his weapon skidding out of reach. Inside, the contact called out, "Files are transmitting." 2 more minutes. The young woman breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. A loud crash came from the front entrance as Atlas reinforcements breached the door. She grabbed a heavy tool from the bench, ready to defend the contact if necessary. "Almost there," the contact muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Just keep them off me." Elon, hearing the commotion, knew he had to end things quickly. He grabbed a length of heavy chain from a nearby rack and swung it with precision, creating a barrier between himself and the advancing men. "You want me?" he shouted. "Come and get me." The distraction worked. Most of the men turned their focus back to him, allowing the young woman and the contact to hold their ground inside. A piercing beep sounded from the computer. "It's done," the contact shouted. "The files are out." Relief flooded Elon's face as he heard the words. With one final effort, he created enough space between himself and the remaining men to retreat toward the facility. He slammed the back door shut behind him, locking it tightly. Inside, the contact and the young woman were already packing up, preparing to escape through a hidden exit. "You did it," the young woman said, her voice filled with awe. Elon nodded, breathing heavily but still composed. "We did it. Let's move before they figure out their next move." The 3 of them slipped out through the concealed door, disappearing into the night as the chaos at the facility continued to unfold. The files were now in the hands of journalists and whistleblower networks, ensuring Atlas's secrets wouldn't stay buried for long. As they drove away in a nondescript van, the young woman looked at Elon, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Why did you do this? You could have walked away." Elon smiled faintly, staring out at the road ahead. "Sometimes the only way to move forward is to fight for what's right."